The sun was setting behind the Bitterroot Mountains when Samuel Thorne finally asked the question that had been weighing on him all day. His grandfather sat in the wooden chair he had built 40 years ago, hands resting on knees that had carried him through more winters than most men ever saw. The old man's face was weathered like the mountains themselves, carved by wind and time and hard choices. But his eyes were still sharp, still clear, still capable of seeing things other men missed. Grandpa Samuel said, adjusting the rucksack at his feet, "My father says you were the hardest man in these mountains once. But looking at you now with Grandmama, I see something different, something softer." Elias Thorne smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "A hard man who never learns to be soft is just a brittle one, son, and brittle things break." "How did you learn that?" Before Elias could answer, the cabin door opened. Catherine Thorne emerged, carrying a tray with 3 tin cups of tea, moving with the careful grace of a woman who had learned long ago how to navigate a world that didn't always make room for gentleness. Her hair was silver now, braided down her back the way she had worn it for 50 years. She set the tray down and placed her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Tell him," she said softly. "He needs to know before he leaves." Samuel looked between them. Tomorrow morning he would board a train east, then a ship to France. The war had ended 2 years ago, but Europe still needed engineers, needed young men willing to rebuild what had been destroyed. He was 19 years old and terrified, though he would never have admitted it out loud. "You're scared," Elias said, reading his grandson the way he had once read animal tracks in snow. "That's good. Fear keeps a man careful, but it can't keep him from moving forward." "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are. But let me tell you something about strength." Elias leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting past the porch railing to the valley below, where the last light painted the grass gold and amber. 50 years ago this winter, when I was 25 years old, exactly your age, I learned what real strength was. And it wasn't what I thought." Catherine settled into the chair beside him, taking his hand in hers. The gesture was so natural, so worn smooth by decades of repetition, that Samuel almost didn't notice it. Almost. "Tell him about the night I came," Catherine said, and Elias began. The wind was changing when Elias Thorne saw the first snow of the season begin to fall. It was November in the year 1870, and he was alone in the high country of Wyoming Territory, 8,500 feet, above a world that had long since forgotten he existed. That was exactly how he wanted it. His cabin sat in a clearing carved from pine and spruce, surrounded by peaks that wore their winter white like armor. The structure was small, 14 feet by 18, built from logs he had cut and shaped himself over the course of 2 hard summers. The walls were thick enough to stop the wind. The roof was layered with sod that would hold heat when the real cold came. A single window faced south, shuttered now against the gathering storm. Inside, everything had its place. The bed against the north wall ropes strung across the frame and toppled with a mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered with a bear hide he had taken 3 winters back. A table he had built from split pine, 1 chair, a fireplace constructed from riverstone, its chimney drawing clean and true. Shelves held his supplies, flour and beans and salt pork coffee and cornmeal and dried apples. Enough for one man to survive 6 months of winter if he was careful. Elias had learned to be careful. He was 25 years old and looked older. Hard living did that to a man. His face was lean, burned dark by sun and wind, marked by a scar that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw. A bear had given him that 2 years back when he had been younger and stupider and thought he could take a grizzly with just a knife. He had been wrong. But he had survived, and the bear had not, and that was what mattered in the mountains. His hair was long, dark brown, tied back with a strip of leather. His hands were scarred and calloused from work from traps and axes and the constant labor of staying alive. He moved with the economy of someone who had learned that wasted motion could mean death when the temperature dropped below 0. The weapons he owned were few, but well maintained. A Sharps rifle in .50 caliber, capable of dropping an elk at 300 yards. A Colt Navy revolver in .36 caliber, worn on his hip whenever he left the cabin. A Bowie knife with a 12-inch blade sharp enough to shave with, and a tomahawk plain and functional that had belonged to his mother. His mother had been Shoshone. His father had been a cavalry scout, a white man who had loved a native woman in a time and place where that love had cost them both dearly. They had lived on the edges of settlements, never quite welcome in either world. His father had died in 1865, shot by the Lakota Raiders near Fort Laramie. His mother had followed 2 years later, not from violence, but from something worse. Loneliness, heartbreak, the slow death of a spirit that had been broken by a town that refused to bury her husband because he had married an Indian woman. Elias had been 18 when he buried his mother himself alone in ground. He had to break with a pickaxe because it was late autumn and the earth was already freezing. No one from the town had come. No one had helped. He had stood over that grave and made himself a promise. He would never need anyone again. For 7 years he had kept that promise. He lived by trapping beaver and martens, selling the pelts twice a year in settlements far enough away that no one knew his name or his story. He hunted elk and deer for meat. He gathered firewood in the summer and stockpiled it against the winter. He fixed what broke and built what he needed and asked nothing of anyone. It was a good life, a quiet life, a lonely life. But loneliness was safer than trust, and Elias had learned that lesson too well to forget it. The afternoon light was fading when he returned from checking his trap line. 20 traps set along the creek that ran through the valley below his cabin, each one positioned with the skill of years of practice. He had pulled 4 beaver that day, good thick pelts that would bring $4 each come spring. $16, enough for coffee and flour and the few things he couldn't make or grow himself. He cleaned the pelts in the creek, scraping away fat and flesh, then stretched them on frames to dry. The work was cold and methodical, and he lost himself in it the way he always did. Hands busy, mind quiet. That was how he survived. By the time he finished, the snow was falling harder. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last 2 hours. The wind was coming from the north now, steady and cold, carrying the smell of a real storm. Not just flurries, a blizzard. Elias looked at the sky, reading it the way other men read books. The clouds were low and heavy, the color of old iron. The light had that strange flat quality it got before a big snow. He would be stuck in the cabin for at least 3 days, maybe more. He needed to bring in extra firewood. He was carrying the last load when he saw them. Footprints in the fresh snow leading from the tree line toward his cabin. Small prints, bare feet, and scattered drops of blood bright red against the white. Elias stopped, set down the wood, drew the Colt revolver from his hip. Someone had been here. Someone desperate enough to walk barefoot through snow. Someone bleeding. The tracks led right to his door. He approached slowly, every sense alert. The door was closed but not barred. He always barred it from the inside when he left. Someone had been inside and left it unlatched behind them. Elias cocked the revolver, the click loud in the winter silence. He pushed the door open with his boot and stepped inside, gun raised. The fire was burning. He had let it die to coals before leaving. Someone had built it back up, and huddled on the floor beside it, wrapped in his own blanket, was a woman. She was conscious barely. Her eyes were open, watching him with the wariness of a trapped animal. She wore the black habit of a nun, though it was torn and filthy, caked with mud and pine needles. Her feet were bare and bleeding. Her face was pale lips tinged with blue. She had the look of someone who had been running for days with death close behind. Elias lowered the gun slowly, holstered it, held up his hands to show they were empty. "Who's chasing you?" His voice came out rough. He didn't use it much anymore. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. Finally, she managed 2 words. "They'll kill me." Elias looked at her for a long moment, took in the rope burns on her wrists, the bruises on her face and neck, the desperate terror in her eyes. He made a decision. "They won't find you here," he said. Then he closed the door and barred it from the inside. Elias didn't waste time with questions. Questions could wait. The woman was dying, and he had seen enough death to recognize it when it was close. Hypothermia was the first problem. Her core temperature was too low. He could tell by the way she was shivering, violent tremors that shook her whole body. Her lips were blue. Her fingers were white. If he didn't warm her up soon, her heart would stop. But warming someone too fast could kill them just as surely as the cold. He knelt beside her, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "I need to get those wet clothes off you. You'll die if I don't." She nodded, understanding, cutting through the fog of cold and exhaustion. Elias stood and turned his back, giving her what privacy he could. "Tell me when you're ready." He heard the rustle of fabric, the small sounds of struggle, as frozen fingers tried to work frozen cloth. It took longer than it should have. Finally, her voice came barely a whisper. Ready. He turned back. She had managed to remove the torn habit and was now wearing only a thin chemise, her arms wrapped around herself. Elias grabbed the bear hide from his bed and wrapped it around her shoulders, careful not to touch her more than necessary. Sit closer to the fire, he said. Not too close. If you warm up too fast, it'll hurt worse. She nodded and shuffled toward the hearth, moving like someone who had pushed their body past the point of endurance and was running on will alone. Elias put water on to heat, not boiling, just warm. While he waited, he took inventory of her injuries. Frostbite on her toes. 3 of them were already turning black. She would lose those if he didn't act fast. Maybe lose more. Lacerations on her feet, deep cuts from running through rocks and brush without shoes. Infected, most of them. Rope burns on her wrists, raw and bleeding. Someone had tied her, tightly, bruises on her shoulders and ribs. She had been beaten. And beneath it all, the hollow look of someone who had not slept or eaten in days. Elias had learned field medicine the hard way during his years working as a scout on the frontier. He had seen men lose fingers to frostbite, seen infections turn to gangrene, seen what happened when you didn't act fast enough. He brought the warm water over and knelt in front of her. This is going to hurt, he said, but I need to soak your feet. She looked at him with eyes that were gray or maybe blue, hard to tell in the firelight. She nodded once. He guided her feet into the water. She gasped, sucking in air through her teeth. The pain of warming tissue was worse than the cold had been. But she didn't cry out, didn't pull away. She just bit down on her lip and endured. Elias respected that. While her feet soaked, he examined the rest of her. The cuts needed cleaning. The rope burns needed salve. The bruises would heal on their own, but the ribs might be cracked. He worked in silence, and she let him. There was something in that silence, something that felt less like the absence of words and more like the presence of understanding. Neither of them were people who trusted easily. Neither of them wanted to explain themselves. So they didn't. When her feet had soaked long enough, Elias lifted them out and dried them carefully. The 3 blackened toes were beyond saving. The tissue was dead. If he left them, gangrene would spread and she would die. He had to cut them off. Those 3 toes, he said, pointing. They're gone, dead tissue. If I don't remove them, the rot will spread. She looked down at her feet, looked back up at him. Have you done this before? Once, man got his hand caught in a trap. I took 3 fingers. He lived. She swallowed hard. Do it. Elias went to his supplies and pulled out what he needed. The Bowie knife cleaned and sharpened. Whiskey for sterilization and pain. Strips of linen for bandages. A leather belt for her to bite down on. He heated the blade in the fire until it glowed red, then let it cool just enough to touch. The heat would cauterize as he cut, sealing the wound. Drink this, he said, handing her the whiskey bottle. She took it with shaking hands and drank, coughing as the liquor burned its way down. He let her drink more than he normally would have. She would need it. Bite down on this. He handed her the belt. She placed it between her teeth. Elias worked fast, one cut clean and precise through the first toe. She screamed into the belt, her whole body going rigid. He pressed the hot blade against the wound, cauterizing it. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin. Second toe, same process. Her scream was weaker this time. She was passing out from the pain. Third toe. She was unconscious now, which was a mercy. Elias bandaged the stumps, carefully wrapping them tight to prevent bleeding. When he was done, he sat back and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. He had just mutilated a woman to save her life, and he didn't even know her name. She woke an hour later. The pain had pulled her back to consciousness. Elias was sitting at the table cleaning his knife, but he stood when he saw her eyes open. It's done, he said. You'll live. She looked down at her bandaged foot, back up at him. Her eyes were full of something he couldn't quite name. Not gratitude. Something harder. Something earned. Thank you, she said. Then after a pause, my name is Catherine. Elias. They looked at each other in the firelight, 2 strangers bound together by blood and pain and the simple fact of survival. Outside, the wind began to howl. The blizzard came on fast, the way they always did in the high country. One moment the world was visible through the window. The next it was nothing but white, a wall of snow, so thick Elias couldn't see the tree line 30 yards away. He had been through storms like this before. They could last for days, sometimes a week. You didn't fight them. You didn't try to outlast them. You just settled in and waited. Catherine had fallen asleep again, exhausted by pain and trauma and the simple effort of staying alive. Elias let her rest on his bed, taking the floor for himself near the fire. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat with his back against the wall, the Colt revolver resting on his thigh, and listened. The wind, the creak of the cabin walls, the hiss of snow against the shutters, and something else. Voices. Faint, distant, but definitely human. Men calling to each other out in the storm. Elias stood slowly moving to the window. He cracked the shutter just enough to peer out into the white chaos. At first he saw nothing, then shadows. Three of them moving through the snow on horseback, barely visible through the blizzard. They were searching, circling, looking for tracks that the falling snow was rapidly erasing. One of the riders stopped not 50 yards from the cabin. Elias could hear him shouting to the others, though the words were lost in the wind. Then they moved on, disappearing back into the storm. Elias closed the shutter, barred it, checked the door. Everything was secure. But they would be back. Men didn't search in a blizzard unless they had a reason, and that reason was sleeping in his bed. He looked at Catherine. Even in sleep, her face was tense, haunted by whatever she was running from. Whoever had tied her wrists, beaten her, chased her into the mountains in winter with no shoes and no hope. Elias had spent 7 years avoiding other people's problems. 7 years taking care of himself and no one else. It was easier that way, safer. But looking at her now, he knew he had already made his choice. The moment he brought her inside. The moment he cut away dead flesh to save her. The moment he decided she deserved to live. He sat back down and waited for dawn. The storm lasted 2 days. During that time, Catherine healed slowly. The fever that came with the amputation was bad, but not fatal. Elias kept her cool with wet cloths, made her drink water mixed with willow bark to bring down the temperature. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. When she was lucid, she told him pieces of her story. She had been traveling with 4 other nuns from Denver to a mission in Montana. Their wagon had been attacked 3 days' ride east near South Pass. 3 men. The leader had a scar on his face, she said. They called him Dalton. The men had killed Sister Agnes immediately when she tried to resist. Then they tied up the remaining 4 nuns and took them into the woods. They talked about selling them, she said, selling them to mining camps where women were scarce and questions weren't asked. The second night, Catherine had managed to cut her bonds on a sharp rock. She ran. She heard gunshots behind her, and she knew what they meant. Her sisters were dead. Witnesses had to be eliminated. She ran for 3 days through country she didn't know, with no food, no water, no shoes. She was going to die. She had accepted that. Then she saw Elias's cabin. "Why did you help me?" she asked once during one of her lucid moments. Elias was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "My mother was Shoshone. When she died, the town wouldn't bury her. Said she was just an Indian. I had to do it myself. I was 18. I swore then I wouldn't let that happen again. Wouldn't stand by and watch someone suffer because no one else cared." Catherine looked at him with those gray blue eyes. "You could have turned me away." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Elias met her gaze. "Because I'm not the man I was at 18 anymore, and I don't want to be." Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding. They were both people who had been broken by the world and put themselves back together with whatever pieces they had left. They recognized each other. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sun came out painfully bright against fresh snow that lay 3 feet deep across the clearing. The world was transformed, silent and white and beautiful in the way that deadly things can be. Elias went out to check the perimeter. The snow had covered most tracks, but not all. He found where the 3 riders had circled the cabin, where they had stopped and discussed what to do. And he found where they had ridden away. But not far. 20 yards into the tree line, he found their camp, or what was left of it. A dead fire, trampled snow, and fresh tracks leading north less than an hour old. They had waited out the storm, and now they were moving again. Elias followed the tracks for a 1/4 mile before he was sure. They weren't leaving the area. They were circling back, scouting, looking for any sign that Catherine had survived. and they would find the cabin eventually. It was only a matter of time. He walked back slowly thinking. He could run, pack up, take Catherine on his horse and head south before they came back. But Catherine couldn't ride yet. Her feet were still healing. She could barely walk. He could hide her and defend the cabin. But 3 men against 1 was bad odds, even with the Sharps rifle giving him range advantage. Or he could do something else. Something risky. Something his father might have done. He could go to them first. When he returned to the cabin, Catherine was awake, sitting by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had found his spare shirt and put it on, and she had attempted to braid her hair, though her fingers were still weak and the braid was crooked. She looked up when he entered. "They're still out there, aren't they?" "Yes." "How many?" "3. She closed her eyes. "Dalton, Miller, and Jessup. The ones who killed my sisters." "Tell me about them." Catherine took a breath. "Dalton is the leader. Smart, cold. He's not doing this because he enjoys it. He's doing it because someone paid him." "Paid him for what?" "To kill me." Elias sat down across from her. Why would someone pay to kill a nun? And that was when she told him the rest. About Ireland, about Lord Ashworth, about the murder she had witnessed 5 years ago when she was 19 and working on her father's farm, about how Ashworth had killed his business partner in a dispute over land and how Catherine had seen it happen, about how she had testified to the police and how Ashworth had bought his way out of charges with bribes and influence, about how her father had told her to run to get as far away as possible because Ashworth would never stop hunting her, about how she had fled to America with £5 and nothing else, about how she had joined the convent because it seemed like the one place a man like Ashworth couldn't reach. She had been wrong. "He found me," Catherine said quietly. "Somehow after 5 years he found me, and he sent Dalton to finish what he started." Elias listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and went to the window looking out at the white landscape. "You can't run forever," he said. "I know. And you can't hide here. They'll find the cabin." "I know that too." She looked at him. "You should let me go. I'll take my chances in the snow. You've done enough." "No. Elias, you'll die if you fight them for me." He turned to face her. "Maybe, but I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away." "Then what do you suggest?" Elias picked up the Sharps rifle, checking the action. "I'm going to make them an offer. They leave and they live. They stay and they don't. They won't leave. They're being paid. Then I'll make sure they can't collect." Before Catherine could argue, there was a knock at the door. Not a polite knock, a heavy, deliberate pounding that shook the frame. Elias and Catherine locked eyes. He motioned for her to get under the bed into the small space he used for storing potatoes. She moved quickly, despite her injured feet squeezing into the narrow gap. Elias positioned himself by the window, rifle aimed at the door. "Who's there?" A man's voice, rough and confident. "Name's Dalton. Looking for a woman. Dangerous criminal. Thought maybe you'd seen her." "Haven't seen anyone." "That's funny, because we found tracks leading right to your door." "Storm covered them." "Some of them." A pause. "Look, friend, we don't want trouble. Just want to talk to her. Clear up a misunderstanding." "Nobody here but me." Elias heard footsteps circling the cabin. Multiple sets. They were surrounding him. "Here's the thing," Dalton said. "We're going to search that cabin. You can let us in peaceful or we can come in hard. Your choice." Elias made his decision. He stepped away from the window, moved to the door, and threw it open. 3 men stood in the snow, Dalton in front, exactly as Catherine had described him. 40s, well-dressed for the frontier, a scar running down his left cheek. Behind him, 2 others. Miller, young and nervous, couldn't have been more than 25. And Jessup, a mountain of a man, 6'4", and built like he ate logs for breakfast. Elias leveled the Sharps at Dalton's chest. "I gave you my answer. Now I'll give you a choice. Turn around and ride away. Do it now and you live." Dalton smiled. Bold words for a man outnumbered. "I only need 1 shot for you. The other 2 can decide if they want to test me after." The smile faded. Dalton studied Elias with new attention, seeing something that made him recalculate. "You're protecting her." "I'm protecting my property. You're trespassing." "We can pay. Ashworth is offering $500 for proof of death. We'll split it with you, 150 in gold. Not interested. Then you're a fool. Elias's finger moved to the trigger. Last chance, Rashong. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind blew snow across the clearing. Somewhere in the trees, a raven called. Then Jessup made his move, reaching for the pistol at his belt. Elias fired. The sharps roared the bullet, kicking up snow 6 inches from Jessup's boot. The big man froze, hands still on his gun. Next one goes through your skull, Elias said calmly, already chambering another round. Now get off my land. Dalton held up a hand to stop Jessup from doing anything stupid. You're making a mistake, friend. We'll be back. And next time we won't knock. I'll be waiting. The three men backed away, slowly mounted their horses, and rode into the trees. But Elias knew they weren't leaving. They were regrouping, planning. He closed the door and barred it. Catherine emerged from under the bed, her face pale. They'll come back, she said. I know. You should have let them take me. Elias looked at her, this woman who had run across mountains with bare feet, who had endured amputation without crying out, who was still thinking about protecting him instead of herself. I spent 7 years alone because I was afraid of losing people, he said, afraid of caring. My mother died because I was too young and weak to help her. I've carried that my whole life. He set the rifle down. I'm not making that mistake again. Catherine stood limping on her bandaged foot. She crossed the small cabin until she was standing in front of him. Elias Thorne, you are not a coward. Whatever happened with your mother, you were a child. You're facing this now. That takes more courage than most men ever have to give. It was the first time anyone had said those words to him. The first time he had felt them might be true. Outside, night was falling, the temperature was dropping, and somewhere in the darkness, 3 killers were planning their next move. But inside the cabin, something had changed. Elias was no longer alone, and Catherine had stopped running. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Dawn came cold and clear. The kind of morning that hurt to breathe, where the air felt like broken glass in your lungs. Elias stood at the window watching the tree line, waiting for movement that he knew would come eventually. The Sharp's rifle rested against the wall beside him, loaded and ready. Behind him, Catherine was awake, sitting at the table with a cup of weak coffee. She had found the strength to walk without help, now though she still favored her injured foot. The bandages would need changing soon. Elias could smell the faint, sweet, rot odor that meant infection was trying to take hold despite the cauterization. They're still out there, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What's your plan? Elias turned from the window. In the morning light, Catherine looked different than she had that first night. Stronger. The color had returned to her face. Her eyes were clear and focused. She had the bearing of someone who had decided to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. I'm going to find their camp, Elias said. Make them an offer they can't refuse. What kind of offer? The kind backed by a .50 caliber rifle at 400 yards. Catherine set down her coffee cup. That's not a negotiation. That's a threat. Sometimes threats are the only language men like Dalton understand. And if they don't listen, Elias picked up the Sharps, checking the action one more time. Then I make good on it. Catherine stood wincing slightly as weight shifted to her injured foot. She crossed to where Elias stood and placed her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him deliberately, and the contact stopped him cold. Don't do this for me, she said quietly. I'm not worth dying for. Elias looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. That's not your decision to make. Then at least let me come with you. No. Elias, I can help. I know these men. I know how they think. You can barely walk. I can ride, and you need someone watching your back. Elias wanted to argue, but the truth was, she had a point. Going alone into a situation where he was outnumbered was risky at best, suicidal at worst. Having someone who could watch for flanking movements, who could reload weapons if it came to a fight, might mean the difference between walking back to the cabin and being carried back. You do exactly what I tell you, he said. No arguments, no hesitation. Agreed. And if I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. You don't wait for me. Catherine's jaw tightened. I won't leave you. You will if I tell you to. They stood there locked in a silent battle of wills until finally Catherine nodded. I'll do what needs doing, same as you. It was the best answer Elias was going to get. They prepared carefully. Elias saddled his horse a tough, mountain-bred gelding he had named Thunder for the sound of its hooves on hard ground. Catherine would ride behind him. She was too weak to manage her own mount, and they only had the one horse anyway. Elias loaded the sharps in his two pistols, the Colt and a backup Remington he kept for emergencies. He gave Catherine the Remington and showed her how to hold it, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "You ever shot before?" he asked. "Once. My father taught me with his old musket when I was 12. This is lighter, less kick, but the principle is the same. Point at what you want to hit and don't close your eyes when you fire." Catherine nodded, turning the pistol over in her hands. It looked heavy and foreign, completely at odds with the woman who had taken vows of peace. But Elias had learned long ago that the world didn't care about vows. It only cared about who was willing to do what needed doing when the moment came. They set out mid-morning following the tracks the three riders had left in the snow. The trail was clear enough. The men hadn't bothered to hide their passage. Why would they? They thought they were the hunters. Elias let them think that. He tracked them for 2 miles through pine forests and across a frozen creek, moving slowly and carefully, always watching ahead for signs of ambush. Catherine sat behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, her breath warm against his back. They didn't speak. The forest had its own language, and talking would only drown it out. Elias listened to the wind in the trees, the creak of branches, the distant cry of a hawk. He watched for birds taking flight, for deer running, for any sign that something had disturbed the natural order of things. He found Dalton's camp in a sheltered draw where a rock overhang provided protection from wind and snow. There was a fire going, thin smoke rising straight up in the still air. 3 horses were picketed nearby, and sitting around the fire, warming their hands and arguing in low voices, were the 3 men. Elias dismounted a quarter-mile away and helped Catherine down. He tied Thunder to a pine tree and pulled the sharps from its scabbard. "Stay here with the horse," he said. "If you hear shooting and I don't come back, in 10 minutes ride south. Don't stop until you reach Fort Bridger." "How will I know the way?" "Follow the creek downstream. It'll take you to the Green River. Follow that south. 3 days' ride." Catherine gripped his arm again. "Elias, please be careful." He looked at her, this woman who had appeared in his cabin barely a week ago, half dead and terrified. Now she was worried about him. The thought was strange and uncomfortable and oddly warming. "I'm always careful," he said. Then he walked toward the camp, rifle in hand. Elias positioned himself on a ridge overlooking Dalton's camp 400 yards out. At that range with the sharps, he could put a bullet through a man's chest, and the others wouldn't even know which direction the shot had come from. But he wasn't here to kill. Not yet. He laid the rifle across a fallen log, steadying it, and took aim at the campfire. He wanted their attention, not their blood. Not yet. He fired. The bullet struck a rock at the edge of the fire and ricocheted with a sharp whine. All 3 men dove for cover, hands scrambling for weapons. Elias chambered another round and waited. After a moment, Dalton's voice called out, sharp and angry. "Who's there? Show yourself." Elias stood up, making himself visible on the ridgeline. At this distance, they could see him, but couldn't shoot him accurately with their pistols. The advantage was entirely his. "Thorne," Dalton's voice carried across the distance. "What do you want?" "To make this simple," Elias called back, "you leave Wyoming territory. Today, right now, you ride east and you don't look back. And if we don't, then I start putting bullets in you until you change your mind or stop breathing." There was a pause. Elias could see Dalton conferring with the other 2 men, gesturing angrily. Finally, Dalton stepped out from behind the rock he had taken cover behind. "Ashworth is paying $500, he shouted. $500 for proof the woman is dead. That's more money than you've seen in your entire life." "Don't need it. Every man needs money. Not more than I need to be able to look at myself." Dalton laughed, the sound bitter and cold. "You're a fool, Thorne. You think one mountain hermit can stop 3 armed men? We'll burn you out. We'll wait until you sleep. We'll get her eventually, and we'll kill you for the trouble." Elias adjusted his aim slightly, targeting Dalton now instead of the fire. "You can try." There was movement to Dalton's right. Jessup, the big man, was attempting to circle around, using the rocks for cover, trying to get an angle on Elias while Dalton kept him talking. Amateur. Elias swung the sharps and fired. The bullet caught Jessup in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind a boulder. The man's scream echoed across the draw. Elias chambered another round, smooth and fast. Next one of you moves, I don't miss. Dalton had dropped flat at the sound of the shot. Now he shouted, Jessup, you hit bad. Shoulder shield. The big man's voice was tight with pain. Went clean through. Miller, the young one, was pressed against a tree trunk, his face white. This wasn't what he had signed up for. Killing unarmed nuns was one thing. Trading shots with someone who could hit them from 4 football fields away was something else entirely. Last chance, Elias called. Ride out now. Leave the woman alone. Or I finish this. There was a long silence. Then Dalton's voice lower now, calculating. What if we can't leave? What if Ashworth will hunt us down if we don't deliver? That's your problem, not mine. Then we got nothing to lose by killing you. You got your lives to lose. Seems like something. Another pause. Elias could see Dalton thinking, weighing options. The man was smart enough to know he was outgunned, but he was also desperate enough to be dangerous. Finally, Dalton stood up slowly, hands visible and empty. All right, Thorne, you made your point. We'll move on. Wear it. I swear, we'll leave the territory. Elias didn't believe him for a second, but he nodded. Get your wounded man and go. I see you again. I don't give warnings. He watched as Miller helped the bleeding Jessup onto his horse, watched as all 3 men mounted up and rode east out of the draw and into the trees beyond. He watched until they were out of sight. Then he turned and ran back to where Catherine was waiting. Did it work? She asked as he untied Thunder. No, Elias said grimly. They'll circle back. Tonight probably, maybe tomorrow, but they're not leaving. Then what do we do? Elias swung into the saddle and pulled Catherine up behind him. We prepare for a siege. They rode back to the cabin in silence, both of them knowing that the real fight was still ahead. The afternoon was spent fortifying. Elias had built the cabin to withstand weather, not warfare, but there were things he could do. He reinforced the door with an extra crossbeam. He stacked firewood against the walls to absorb bullets. He positioned his ammunition where he could reach it quickly. He filled every container with water in case they couldn't get to the creek. Catherine helped where she could, moving slower than she wanted, but refusing to rest. She organized the food supplies, rationing what they had. She prepared bandages from torn cloth. She loaded pistols and stacked them within easy reach. They worked side by side, and gradually Elias became aware of how natural it felt. The rhythm of shared labor, the wordless communication of 2 people working toward the same goal. He would reach for something, and she would hand it to him before he asked. She would struggle with a heavy pot, and he would lift it without being told. It felt like something Elias had forgotten he was missing. As the sun began to set, Catherine made stew from dried venison and the last of the potatoes. It was simple food, but it was hot, and it filled the belly. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the small table. Finally, Catherine spoke. Tell me about your mother. Elias looked up from his bowl. Why? Because I want to know, because you mentioned her, and I heard something in your voice when you did. Elias set down his spoon. He had not talked about his mother in years, had not allowed himself to think about her much. The pain was too close even after all this time. But Catherine was waiting, and somehow in this small cabin with danger closing in from outside, it felt safe to speak. Her name was Bright Morning, he said slowly. Shoshone, she was 17 when my father met her. He was 25, working as a scout for the army. He fell in love with her the moment he saw her. Used to say she was the most beautiful thing in the mountains, and he had seen every mountain there was. How did they end up together? He left the army, married her despite everyone telling him not to, built a cabin near a trading post, tried to make a life. It was hard. White folks didn't want anything to do with him for marrying an Indian. Her people didn't trust him for being white. They were alone together. Like us, Catherine said quietly. Elias met her eyes. Yes, like us. What happened to them? Father was killed in a raid. Wrong place, wrong time. Mother tried to keep going, but the town made it impossible. They wouldn't trade with her, wouldn't let her buy supplies. When she got sick, the doctor wouldn't see her. His hands clenched on the table. She died alone while I was out hunting. I came back and found her cold. I was 18 years old, and I didn't know what to do. Catherine reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. You were a child. I was old enough to help, old enough to fight, but I didn't. I just let it happen. You survived. That took strength, too. Elias looked at her hand on his, small and pale against his scarred, weathered skin. I ran afterward, came up into these mountains and told myself I didn't need anyone. Told myself being alone was safer. And was it? Yes, until you showed up half frozen in my cabin. Catherine smiled just a little. Sorry about that. Don't be. Elias turned his hand over, gripping hers. I needed someone to save. Needed to prove I could do it this time. That I wasn't the same scared boy who watched his mother die. You're not. You proved that already. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined across the table, the firelight dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, night was falling, and somewhere in the darkness, 3 men were planning murder. But inside, 2 people who had been alone too long had found something neither of them had been looking for. Something worth fighting for. The attack came at midnight. Elias woke to the sound of horses outside, multiple sets of hooves on frozen ground. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Catherine sat up on the bed, already reaching for the pistol he had left beside her. How many? She whispered. Elias peered through a crack in the shutters. 3, same as before. I thought Jessup was wounded. He was, still is probably, but not dead. Outside he could see torches. The flickering light revealed Dalton on horseback holding something. It took Elias a moment to recognize what it was. A burning brand. They're going to burn us out, he said. Catherine's face went pale. The cabin is wood. It'll go up like kindling. I know. So what do we do? Elias made a decision. You stay here, cover the door. Anyone tries to come through, you shoot. Don't think, don't hesitate. Just shoot. What are you going to do? I'm going to give them something else to think about. Before she could argue, he moved to the back corner of the cabin, where a loose board concealed a narrow crawl space he had dug as an emergency exit. It led under the cabin wall and out into the root cellar behind the structure. From there, he could move without being seen. Elias, Catherine hissed, this is insane. Probably, but it's also our only chance. He squeezed through the opening and was gone. The root cellar was cramped and dark, smelling of earth and old potatoes. Elias crawled through it, quickly emerging behind the cabin, where the shadows were deepest. He had the Colt in his hand, the sharps left behind because it was too long for close quarters work. He moved along the tree line, circling toward where Dalton and his men were gathered. They were arguing in low voices, deciding who would throw the first torch. Elias got within 30 yards before anyone noticed him. Then Miller turned and saw a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Behind us, Elias fired. The bullet caught Miller in the leg, dropping him. Elias dove sideways as a return fire came from Dalton and Jessup, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. He rolled behind a tree, chambered another round, and fired again. This shot missed, but it made them scatter. The horses panicked, rearing and pulling at their reins. Dalton's torch fell in the snow and went out. Elias moved again, circling, keeping them off balance. He fired twice more, forcing them to take cover, preventing them from organizing an attack. From the cabin, he heard Catherine's pistol bark once. Then again. Someone had tried the door. The fight became chaos. Darkness and gunfire, and men shouting. Elias moved like a ghost through the trees, shooting and moving, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. He had fought like this before, years ago, when he had worked as a scout, and survival meant being faster and smarter than the enemy. He wounded Jessup again, this time in the leg. The big man went down hard. Miller was already down, bleeding and cursing. That left Dalton. Elias found him trying to flank toward the cabin's front door. The man had his pistol out, hammer back, ready to kill whoever opened it. Dalton, Elias called. The man spun, firing wildly. The bullet whined past Elias's head, close enough to feel the heat. Elias didn't miss. His shot caught Dalton in the gun hand, shattering bone. The pistol fell from nerveless fingers. Dalton collapsed, cradling his ruined hands, screaming. Elias walked forward, slowly, Colt trained on him. It's over. You lost. My hand, you destroyed my hand. Be grateful it wasn't your head. Elias looked at the other 2 men. Miller was trying to crawl away, dragging his wounded leg. Jessup had passed out from blood loss. Take your men and go. I see any of you again, you don't get warnings. You don't get mercy. You just die. Dalton was crying now, cradling his shattered hand. Ashworth will send others. This doesn't end. Then I'll deal with them too. You can't fight everyone. Elias looked down at him without pity. Watch me. He backed away, keeping his gun trained on them until he reached the cabin. Catherine threw open the door and he slipped inside. She barred it behind him. You're bleeding, she said, staring at his arm. Elias looked down. A bullet had grazed him during the fight, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a shallow furrow across his bicep. He hadn't even felt it happen. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Sit down. She pushed him into the chair and went to work with water and bandages, cleaning and wrapping the wound with practiced efficiency. Her hands were steady, even though Elias could see she was shaking. I heard the shooting, she said quietly. I thought you were dead. Takes more than 3 hired guns to kill me. Don't joke. I was terrified. Elias caught her hand, stopping her. She looked up and he saw tears in her eyes. I'm here, he said. I'm alive. We both are. Catherine nodded, wiping at her eyes with her free hand. I know, when I heard the shots, I realized how much I didn't want you to die. How much I need you. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. Elias stood slowly and Catherine stood with him. They were very close now, close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat, could smell the faint scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to her hair. Catherine, he said, then stopped, not knowing what else to say. She solved the problem by stepping forward and resting her head against his chest. Her arms went around him, and after a moment of surprise, his arms went around her. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, while outside the defeated men gathered their wounded and rode away into the darkness. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of peace. Dalton and his gang didn't return. The weather held cold but clear. Elias checked his trap line and found 4 more beaver. Catherine's foot continued to heal the infection, finally clearing. They fell into a routine. Elias would wake before dawn and tend to the fire, the horses, the basic work of survival. Catherine would make breakfast simple but filling. They would work together through the morning, then Elias would go out to check traps or hunt, while Catherine stayed at the cabin mending clothes or organizing supplies. Evenings were spent by the fire. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Catherine reading from Elias's small collection of books, while he carved wooden spoons or bowls, keeping his hands busy. It felt like something Elias had never had before. It felt like home. On the 4th day, everything changed. Elias was returning from the creek with fresh water when he saw her. A young woman, maybe 18 years old, stumbling through the snow toward the cabin. Her dress was torn. Her face was bruised. She was moving like someone who had pushed past exhaustion and was running on pure desperation. He dropped the water buckets and ran to her. She collapsed into his arms before she reached the cabin. Please, she gasped. Help me. They're coming. Elias carried her inside. Catherine rushed over immediately, helping ease the girl onto the bed. Who's coming? Elias asked. Dalton. His men. They have others. Women like me. Chained up. The girl was shaking violently. I escaped when you shot them. When they were distracted. But there are more. 4 others still there. Chained to a wagon. Please, you have to help them. Catherine looked at Elias. We have to. It could be a trap. I don't care. If there are women being held, we can't leave them. Elias studied the girl. Her terror was real. The bruises on her face were real. The rope burns on her wrists matched Catherine's, though this was real. Where's the camp? He asked. 2 miles north, in a canyon. They have a wagon and supplies. They were taking us to sell to the mining camps. Catherine's face hardened. How many men? 3, but Dalton is hurt, and the big one can barely walk. Elias stood already making plans. We'll need horses, weapons, and we'll need to move fast before they realize you're gone. I'm coming with you, Catherine said. No, you stay here with her. Keep her safe. I'll go alone, show. Elias, you can't face 3 armed men by yourself. I've done it before. And you were lucky. Don't push your luck. They stood facing each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Catherine spoke quietly. I killed a man once before I came to America. The man who murdered his partner, Lord Ashworth. I didn't mean to kill him, but I pushed him, and he fell and struck his head. That's why he's hunting me. Not just because I witnessed murder, but because I'm the one who killed him. Elias stared at her. This was new. This was the piece of the story she had held back. I've carried that guilt for 5 years, Catherine continued, carried it across an ocean, into a convent, into these mountains. I thought if I ran far enough, if I hid well enough, I could escape what I'd done. But I can't. The only way to escape guilt is to face it, to do something that matters. She crossed to where the pistol lay on the table and picked it up. Those women need help, and I need to help them. Not because it will erase what I did, but because it's the right thing to do. Elias looked at this woman who had been a nun, who had taken vows of peace, who was now holding a gun and telling him she was ready to use it to save others. He nodded slowly. All right, we go together, but you follow my lead. Agreed. They left the girl whose name was Anna in the cabin with instructions to bar the door and hide if anyone came. Then they rode north into the early morning darkness toward a fight that could cost them everything. The canyon was exactly where Anna had said it would be. Elias and Catherine left the horse a quarter-mile out and approached on foot, moving silently through the pre-dawn shadows. The camp was situated in a sheltered spot where the canyon walls provided protection from wind. There was a wagon covered with canvas, a fire burning low, and sitting around that fire passing a whiskey bottle were two men. Dalton was missing. Elias studied the camp carefully. Jessup was there, his leg bandaged and his face gray with pain. Miller was there looking nervous and young in the firelight. But no Dalton. Where's the third man? Catherine whispered. I don't know, but we can't wait. He was about to move when he heard it. A woman's scream muffled coming from the wagon. Catherine's hand clenched on his arm. They're hurting them. Wait, we need to be smart about this. But Catherine wasn't waiting. She stood and walked toward the camp, pistol in hand. Elias cursed under his breath and followed. Miller saw them first. He fumbled for his gun, but Elias was faster. One shot from the sharps and Miller went down clutching his shoulder. Jessup tried to stand, but his wounded leg buckled. He fell back with a grunt of pain. Catherine ran past them to the wagon. She tore open the canvas flap and gasped. Inside were four women ranging in age from 16 to maybe 30. And all of them were chained to the wagon bed by their ankles. All of them showed signs of abuse. Bruises, torn clothing, haunted eyes. I'm here to help, Catherine said quickly. Where's the key? One of the women older than the others pointed. Dalton has it. He rode to town to get more supplies, more chains. Catherine turned to Elias. We need to break these chains. Elias examined them. Heavy irons secured with padlocks. I can shoot the locks off, but I need you to get them away from the chains first. If a bullet ricochets, someone could be killed. Catherine nodded and began organizing the women, having them press against the far side of the wagon, while Elias positioned himself carefully. He fired 4 times precisely, each shot destroying a lock. The chains fell away. The women were free. That was when Dalton returned. He rode into camp at full gallop, saw what was happening, and went for his gun, despite his shattered hand. Elias turned, bringing the sharps up, but Catherine was faster. She fired the pistol once, twice, 3 times. The first shot missed. The second caught Dalton's horse, which reared and threw him. The third shot went wide. But it was enough. Dalton hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Jessup raised his hands. We're done. We surrender. Elias kept his rifle trained on them, while Catherine helped the women out of the wagon. They were weak, traumatized, but alive. Can you ride? Catherine asked them. The oldest woman nodded. If it means getting away from here, I can do anything. They took Dalton's horses and the wagon, left Miller and Jessup tied up in the camp with enough food and water to last a few days. Someone would find them eventually, or they would freeze. Elias found he didn't much care which. Catherine rode in the wagon with the rescued women, tending to their injuries, speaking softly to calm them. Elias rode ahead, scouting the trail, making sure they weren't followed. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was fully up. Anna rushed out to meet them, crying with relief when she saw the others. 5 women, 5 lives saved. Catherine stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching them embrace, watching them cry, watching them begin to heal. Elias came to stand beside her. You did that, he said quietly. You saved them. Catherine shook her head. We did it, together. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes, Elias saw something he had never expected to find in another person. Not just gratitude, not just respect, love. I can't stay here, Catherine said. These women need to get somewhere safe. They need medical care, legal protection, a way to start over. I have to take them to Denver. Denver is 200 miles, I know. And Dalton works for someone there. This Marcus O'Brien, it's dangerous. I know that too. She reached up and touched his face, the gesture so tender it stopped his breath. But it's the right thing to do. And I think you know that. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When do we leave? You think I'm letting you ride into danger alone after everything?" Catherine smiled and it transformed her face. "No, I suppose you're not." They prepared to leave the next morning. 5 rescued women, 1 injured nun, who wasn't really a nun anymore, and a mountain man who had forgotten how to be alone. They packed supplies for a 2-week journey, food and blankets and weapons. Everything they would need to survive the trip and whatever waited at the end of it. The night before they left, Catherine found Elias outside staring up at the stars. The temperature had dropped below zero, but the sky was clear, and the stars burned like ice chips scattered across black velvet. "You're thinking about the cabin," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Yes. You could stay. Let me take the women to Denver. Come back here where it's safe." Elias looked at her. "Would you want me to?" "No, but I'd understand if you did." He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and he wrapped them in his larger, warmer ones. "7 years I lived alone up here," he said. 7 years telling myself I didn't need anyone. That solitude was safer than connection. And I believed it. Until you showed up half dead in my cabin and reminded me what it felt like to care about someone." "Elias, I'm not finished." He turned to face her fully. "I don't know what happens in Denver. I don't know if we can stop O'Brien or protect these women or even survive what's coming. But I know one thing, I'm not going back to being alone. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Catherine's eyes were shining with tears. "Together," she repeated. Then she did something that surprised them both. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, just a soft press of lips, but it said everything that needed saying. When she pulled back, Elias was staring at her with wonder. "I've been wanting to do that for days," Catherine admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't sure you wanted me to. Because I'm supposed to be a nun. Because I was afraid. And now? Now I'm more afraid of not taking the chance." Elias pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she melted into him. They stood like that under the frozen stars, 2 broken people who had found wholeness in each other. Tomorrow they would ride toward danger, toward a city where powerful men wanted Catherine dead, toward a fight they might not win. But tonight they had this. They had each other. And for the first time in 7 years, Elias Thorne felt like he had come home. The journey to Denver took 12 days. They traveled slowly, mindful of the women who were still healing from their ordeal. Anna proved to be the strongest, taking turns driving the wagon with Catherine. The others rode in back, wrapped in blankets, speaking little but watching the mountains fall away behind them, with expressions of relief mixed with uncertainty. Elias ranged ahead on Thunder, scouting the trail, hunting for fresh meat, making sure they weren't being followed. At night he would return to camp and sit by the fire while Catherine tended to the women, and he would marvel at how naturally she had slipped into the role of protector and healer. She was not a nun anymore. She had made that clear the night they left the cabin. But she was something else now, something harder to define. A woman who had found her purpose not in prayer, but in action. On the 5th day, they crossed a frozen river, and Catherine's horse stumbled on the ice. She went down hard, and for a terrible moment, Elias thought she had broken something. But she stood up slowly, favoring her already injured foot, and waved away his concern. "I'm fine," she said through gritted teeth. She wasn't fine. He could see pain in every step she took. But she refused to rest, refused to slow them down. That night, when the others were asleep, Elias rewrapped her foot and found the amputation site was inflamed again. "You're pushing too hard," he said quietly. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do. Rest. Let it heal." Catherine looked at him in the firelight. "Those women need to get to Denver, need to be somewhere safe. I can rest when they're protected." Elias wanted to argue, but he understood. This was how Catherine dealt with her guilt, with the weight of everything she had survived, by helping others, by refusing to stop even when her body begged for mercy. It was noble and foolish in equal measure, and Elias loved her for it. On the 8th day, they encountered another traveler on the road, a lone rider well-dressed sitting his horse with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself. He was older than Elias, maybe 40, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Elias rode forward to intercept him, one hand on his pistol. The man raised his hands peacefully. "Easy, friend. I'm not looking for trouble." "Then state your business." "Name's Thomas Wade, Deputy U.S. Marshal out of Denver." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a badge. "And I'm looking for a man named Elias Thorne." Every muscle in Elias's body tensed. "Why, because Marcus O'Brien hired me to kill him." Wade's expression was calm matter of fact. "Told me Thorne was an outlaw, a murderer dangerous to decent folks. Paid me $200 in advance." Elias's hand moved to his gun. "If you're here to collect, you'll find I don't die easy." Wade smiled slightly. "I'm sure you don't, but I'm not here to collect. I'm here to help." "Why then?" "Because I investigated O'Brien's story and it's full of holes. You're not an outlaw. You're a mountain man who saved a woman from hired killers. And those killers work for O'Brien." Wade gestured toward the wagon. "And unless I'm mistaken, those are more women you've rescued from the same gang." Elias studied the marshal carefully, looking for deception. Found none. "What's your interest in this?" "O'Brien is dirty, has been for years, but he's careful, connected, hard to touch. If you've got evidence against him, testimony from witnesses, I want to help you bring him down." Catherine had come forward during this exchange, limping on her bad foot. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Wade looked at her. "You must be Sister Catherine. Or should I say Catherine Brennan, the woman who witnessed Lord Ashworth commit murder 5 years ago in Ireland." Catherine's face went pale. "How do you know that?" "Because O'Brien is sloppy when he thinks he's safe. Keeps records, ledgers, letters. I've been building a case against him for 2 years. Your testimony could be the final piece I need." Wade leaned forward in his saddle. "I can't promise you'll be completely safe. O'Brien has friends in high places. But I can promise you a fair hearing, a chance to see justice done." Elias and Catherine exchanged glances. This could be a trap, or it could be exactly what they needed. "What do you want from us?" Elias asked. "Come to Denver. Testify before Marshal Grant, my superior. He's an honest man, and he's been waiting for a chance to take down O'Brien just as long as I have." Wade's expression hardened. "But we need to move fast. O'Brien knows his men failed. He'll be making plans, covering his tracks, maybe running. We have a window, maybe a week. After that, he'll disappear and take his operation with him." Catherine spoke quietly. "These women need medical attention. They need safety. I have a sister in Denver, runs a boarding house. Good woman, discreet. She'll take them and no questions asked, keep them hidden until the trial." Wade looked at each of the women in turn. "You'll be safe there. You have my word." One of the women, the oldest, spoke up for the first time in days. "Will we have to testify, stand up in court and tell what happened to us?" "Only if you want to, Tisha," Wade said gently. "But your stories matter. They could help put a very bad man away for a very long time." The woman looked at her companions. One by one they nodded. "Then we'll do it," she said. "We'll tell what he did." Wade nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "Then let's get you to Denver." Denver in 1871 was a city trying to decide what it wanted to be. Parts of it were refined with brick buildings and gas lamps and ladies in fine dresses. Other parts were rough frontier with saloons and gambling halls and men settling disputes with fists or guns. Wade led them to his sister's boarding house on the edge of the respectable district. It was a 3-story wooden building painted white with a garden in front that was dormant now under winter snow. Wade's sister was named Margaret, and she was a formidable woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense efficiency. She took one look at the rescued women and immediately began organizing rooms, hot baths, clean clothes, and food. "You did good work bringing them here," she told Elias and Catherine. "I'll make sure they're safe." That night, Elias and Catherine had their first real beds in 2 weeks. Separate rooms because Margaret ran a proper establishment. But after midnight, Catherine slipped into Elias's room and sat on the edge of his bed. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too many thoughts." She looked at him in the darkness. "Tomorrow we confront O'Brien. What if it doesn't work? What if he's too powerful? Then we try something else." "You make it sound simple." It is simple. We do what's right, and we keep doing it until it works or we can't anymore. Catherine smiled slightly. Is that how you've survived all these years alone? No, alone I just survived. With you, I'm actually living. She reached out and took his hand. Elias Thorne, when this is over, whatever happens, I want you to know something. What? I'm not taking my final vows. I'm leaving the order officially. Not because I don't believe anymore, but because I believe in something else now. She squeezed his hand. I believe in us. Elias sat up, pulling her close. Catherine, I don't have much to offer. A cabin in the mountains. A hard life. Not much money or comfort. I don't want comfort. I want purpose. I want to wake up every day knowing I'm doing something that matters. And I want to do it with you. They sat in the darkness, holding each other, knowing that tomorrow could change everything. But tonight they had this. The next morning, Wade took Elias and Catherine to meet Marshal Grant. The marshal's office was in a brick building near the center of town. Grant himself was in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of years on the frontier. He had the bearing of a man who had seen too much to be easily impressed, but hadn't lost his sense of what was right. He listened without interrupting while Catherine told her story. All of it. Ireland and Ashworth and the murder. The flight to America. The convent. The attack on the wagon. Dalton and his men. The women they had rescued. When she finished, Grant sat back in his chair. That's quite a tale. Every word is true, Catherine said. I believe you. Grant looked at Wade. You have evidence. Wade pulled out a leather satchel and emptied it on the desk. Letters, a ledger, legal documents. This is what I've collected over 2 years. Letters between O'Brien and various clients, including one Lord Ashworth of County Cork, Ireland. A ledger detailing payments for services rendered coded but decipherable, and testimony from 3 women who were trafficked by Dalton's gang and sold to mining camps in the territory. Grant examined the documents carefully. This is good, better than I expected. But O'Brien has friends, the territorial governor, half the businessmen in Denver. He'll fight this. Then we fight harder, Elias said. Grant looked at him. You're the mountain man, Thorne. Yes. Wade says you killed 2 of Dalton's men and wounded the rest. I defended myself and the women in my care. That's not how O'Brien will tells it. He'll paint you as a vigilante, a murderer. Let him try. Grant smiled slightly. I like you. You're direct. He stood. Here's what we're going to do. We arrest O'Brien today before he knows we're coming. We charge him with conspiracy to commit murder, trafficking, and about a dozen other crimes. We hold a public hearing, get everything on record, and we make it impossible for his friends to protect him without looking complicit. What about Ashworth? Catherine asked. He's the one who started all this. Extradition from Ireland will take months, maybe years, and he's a lord with protection. But if we can break O'Brien, get him to testify against Ashworth in exchange for a reduced sentence, we might have a chance. Grant looked at her seriously. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. O'Brien will attack your character. Say you're lying. Say you're a criminal yourself. I know. And you're still willing to testify publicly? Yes. Grant nodded. Then let's do this. They arrested Marcus O'Brien at his office above a bank on Larimer Street. He was a slight man in his 40s, well-dressed with the soft hands of someone who had never done physical labor. He protested loudly when Grant and Wade walked in with arrest warrants. This is outrageous. I'm a respected attorney. You can't just... We can and we are, Grant said calmly. You're charged with conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent, but I doubt you will. O'Brien's eyes darted around the room, calculating, looking for an escape that didn't exist. I want to speak to the governor. You can speak to him from a cell. They took him to the territorial courthouse, a 2-story stone building that served as the center of Denver's legal system. Word spread fast that a prominent attorney had been arrested, and by the time the hearing began, the next morning the courtroom was packed. Elias sat in the gallery with the rescued women watching as Catherine took the stand. She wore a simple dress that Margaret had given her, and her hair was braided neatly down her back. She looked small and vulnerable, but when she began to speak, her voice was steady. She told them everything. The prosecutor, a young man named Harrison, who worked under Grant, asked careful questions, and Catherine answered each one with precision and detail. Yes, she had witnessed Lord Ashworth commit murder. Yes, she had testified to the police in Ireland. Yes, Ashworth had threatened her, forcing her to flee. Yes, O'Brien had hired Dalton's gang to kill her. Yes, the same gang had been trafficking women for sale. O'Brien's attorney, an expensive suit named Blackwood, tried to tear her apart during cross-examination. Miss Brennan, isn't it true you have a history of making false accusations? No. Isn't it true you ran away from a legal marriage contract in Ireland? I ran from a forced marriage to a man old enough to be my grandfather. Isn't it true you joined a convent under false pretenses, using it as a hiding place rather than a calling? Catherine paused. I joined because I needed safety. I stayed because I found purpose. There's nothing false about that. Blackwood paced in front of her. And isn't it true that you killed Lord Ashworth yourself, that all of this is an elaborate cover-up for murder? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Grant banged his gavel for order. Catherine's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. I pushed Lord Ashworth during a confrontation. He fell and hit his head, but he didn't die. I saw him moving as I ran. If he died later, I wasn't there to see it. Convenient. It's the truth. The questioning went on for 2 hours, but Catherine never broke, never contradicted herself, never lost her composure. When it was over, Elias wanted to go to her, but Wade stopped him. Let the other witnesses go first. Build the case. Anna testified next. Then Mary, one of the other rescued women. Then Rose, the youngest. Each one told their story. Kidnapping, abuse, being sold like livestock. And each one identified O'Brien as the man who had arranged their trafficking. O'Brien sat at the defense table, his face growing paler with each testimony. Blackwood tried to discredit the women, paint them as prostitutes or liars, but their stories were too consistent, too detailed, too raw to be false. On the second day of the hearing, something unexpected happened. O'Brien cracked. He stood suddenly during a recess, his face red, his hands shaking. Enough. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Blackwood tried to stop him, but O'Brien shook him off. Grant brought the court to order. Mr. O'Brien, you wish to make a statement? Yes. O'Brien looked at Catherine, and for a moment something like shame crossed his face. I did it. All of it. Ashworth paid me to have her killed. $2,000. I hired Dalton. I provided information on where she would be traveling. And when Dalton's gang started bringing back other women, I saw an opportunity. I found buyers, mining camps, frontier settlements, places where women were scarce and men didn't ask questions. The courtroom was absolutely silent. How many? Grant asked quietly. 37 women, over 3 years. O'Brien's voice broke. I told myself it was just business, that they were nobody, that it didn't matter. And Ashworth, he's been buying women too, for his estate in Ireland. I arranged shipments, told him they were willing immigrants. He knew better. He didn't care. Grant looked at Catherine. Did you know Ashworth was still alive? No, I thought I had killed him. I've lived with that guilt for 5 years. O'Brien laughed bitterly. He's alive, living in his manor, still rich, still powerful, still getting away with it. Not anymore, Grant said. He turned to Wade. Send word to the British authorities. Request extradition, and make sure the press gets every word of this testimony. Over the next 3 days, the full scope of O'Brien's operation came to light. Names were named, locations were identified, evidence was compiled. 37 women. Some had been recovered. Some had died. Some had simply disappeared into the vast frontier, their fates unknown. The territory governor tried to distance himself from the scandal. O'Brien's business partners scrambled to claim ignorance. The respectable citizens of Denver were shocked, horrified, and secretly thrilled by the drama of it all. And through it all, Catherine sat in the courtroom, listening to the full truth of what she had survived, what other women had survived, and what would have happened to her if Elias hadn't opened his cabin door that winter night. On the 4th day, Grant issued his verdict. O'Brien would serve 20 years at hard labor. Dalton, Miller, and Jessup, when they were found, would face similar sentences. And formal requests for Ashworth's extradition would be filed with the British government. It wasn't perfect justice. Ashworth would probably never face trial. Some of the women would never be found. Some of the buyers and traffickers would escape punishment. But it was something. It was accountability. It was proof that even powerful men could be brought down when enough people were willing to stand up and tell the truth. After the verdict was read, Catherine walked out of the courthouse into the winter sunlight. Elias was waiting for her on the steps, and she went straight into his arms. "It's over," she said. "Yes. I thought I would feel different, lighter, but I just feel tired." Elias held her close. "Give it time. The weight doesn't lift all at once." They stood there while people flowed around them, while reporters shouted questions, while the city buzzed with the scandal. But in that moment, they were alone together, two people who had fought for something good and won. Wade found them an hour later at Margaret's boarding house. The women are all settling in. Anna's going back to her family in Montana. Mary's staying in Denver to work as a seamstress. Rose has been taken in by the Sisters of Mercy. Everyone's accounted for, everyone's safe. "Thank you," Catherine said, "for everything. Thank you. You gave me the case I needed." Wade hesitated. "There's something else." Marshal Grant offered Elias a job. Deputy Marshal, $50 a month plus housing. "It's good work if you want it." Elias looked at Catherine. "What do you think?" "I think it's your decision." "No, it's our decision." Catherine smiled. "Then I think you should consider it. You're good at protecting people, and there are a lot of people who need protecting. What about you? What will you do?" Before she could answer, Mother Superior from Catherine's convent arrived at the boarding house. She was an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a kind face. She had traveled from the mission when she heard about the trial. "Sister Catherine," she said, "or should I say simply Catherine now? Catherine is fine, Mother. I heard your testimony, what you survived, what you did to save those women." The old nun smiled. "You have done more for God's work in these past weeks than most people do in a lifetime." "I'm leaving the order," Catherine said. "Officially, I wanted you to know. I suspected as much, and I give you my blessing." Mother Superior reached out and took Catherine's hand. "God's work takes many forms, child. Yours is not in the cloister. It's out here in the world, helping those who have no one else." "Thank you, Mother. There is one thing, though, before you go." Mother Superior pulled out a letter. "The diocese in Denver is opening an orphanage. They need someone to run it, someone who understands suffering and compassion, someone who can teach children that the world can be hard, but also good." Catherine took the letter, reading it carefully. "They're offering me the position. If you want it, the pay is modest, but the work is important, and you would be free to marry to have your own life while still serving those who need you most." Catherine looked at Elias. "What do you think?" "I think you'd be perfect for it." She turned back to Mother Superior. "Can I have time to think about it?" "Take all the time you need." That night, Elias and Catherine walked through Denver's streets, past the saloons and shops out to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. They stood looking at the mountains in the distance, purple and white in the fading light. "I need to tell you something," Catherine said, "before we make any decisions." "What?" "I love you." She said it simply, without drama, as if stating a fact. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when you cut off my toes to save my life. Maybe when you stood up to three armed men to protect me. Maybe when you held me by the fire and made me feel safe for the first time in years. But I love you, and I need you to know that before we decide what happens next." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been alone for 7 years. Told myself I was better that way, safer. But the truth is I was just scared. Scared of losing someone, scared of caring, scared of being hurt again." He took her hands in his. "Then you showed up, and all that fear didn't matter anymore. Because being without you was scarier than any of it. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. I love you, Catherine Brennan, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that." Catherine smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I have a question for you." "What? Will you marry me?" Elias laughed, the sound surprised and delighted. "Aren't I supposed to ask you?" "I'm a modern woman. I can ask if I want to." "Then yes, absolutely yes." They kissed there on the edge of Denver while the mountains watched and the prairie wind blew cold around them. It was a promise and a beginning, and it felt like coming home. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at Margaret's boarding house. Wade stood as best man. Anna and the other rescued women were there. Mother Superior performed the ceremony, one of her last acts before retiring. Do you, Elias Thorne, take this woman to be your wife, to have and to hold in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. And do you, time, Catherine Brennan, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss was gentle and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Catherine was crying. Happy tears, she said quickly. I know. They stayed in Denver for 2 months while Catherine organized the orphanage, and Elias worked with Wade, learning the job of a marshal's deputy. It was different from trapping, harder in some ways, easier in others. But Elias found he was good at it, good at tracking criminals, good at keeping the peace, good at protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But as spring approached, both he and Catherine felt the pull of the mountains. The cabin was still there waiting. The traps were still set. The wilderness was still calling. I don't think I'm meant for city life, Elias admitted one evening. Neither am I, Catherine said, but the orphanage needs someone. Find someone else, someone who wants to stay in Denver. And what would we do instead? Elias smiled. We go back to the mountains. We live simply. We help people when they come to us. We build a life that's ours. Catherine considered this. What if I want to expand the cabin, add rooms? Then we add rooms. What if I want to start a school, teach mountain children to read? Then we start a school. What if I want to have children of our own? Elias pulled her close. Then we have children, as many as you want. 4, Catherine said immediately. 4 it is. They left Denver in April when the snow was melting and the first green was appearing on the prairie. Wade came to see them off. You're always welcome back, he said, if you change your mind about the marshal job. I appreciate that, but I think our place is up there. Elias pointed to the mountains. Fair enough. Take care of each other. We will. They rode north, retracing the path they had taken months before, but this time without urgency, without fear. Just 2 people going home. The cabin was exactly as they had left it. The door still barred, the supplies still stored. Even Elias's carving tools were still on the table where he had left them. Catherine walked through the small space, running her hands over the walls, the furniture, the fireplace. It's perfect. It's small. We'll make it bigger. And they did. Over that summer and fall, they expanded the cabin, added a second room, built a proper kitchen, constructed a small barn for the horse and future livestock. Catherine planted a garden, and Elias built raised beds to protect it from frost. They worked side by side every day, and it felt right, natural, like this was what they had been meant to do all along. The first winter together was hard but beautiful. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they had each other. Catherine taught Elias to read better, working through the books she had brought from Denver. Elias taught Catherine to shoot accurately, to track animals, to survive in the wilderness. And at night they would sit by the fire, Catherine's head on Elias's shoulder, and talk about the future, about the children they would have, about the life they were building. Do you ever regret it, Elias asked one night, leaving the convent, leaving the life you had planned? Never, Catherine said. I thought I knew what God wanted from me, prayer and contemplation and a quiet life. But I was wrong. He wanted me out here doing this with you. How do you know? Because I've never been happier, and I think that's what God wants for all of us, to find the place where we belong and the people we belong with. Elias kissed the top of her head. Then we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. Their first child, a son, was born in the spring of 1872. They named him Thomas after Wade. Their second, a daughter, came in 1874. Then twin boys in 1877. 4 children, just as Catherine had wanted. The cabin grew with the family. More rooms, more beds, more life. But they never forgot where they had come from or what they had survived. And when other people came to them lost or hurt or running from something, Elias and Catherine never turned them away. Over the years, they saved 43 people. Some stayed, some moved on, but all of them survived. And through it all, through the hard winters and the struggling summers and the constant work of staying alive in the mountains, Elias and Catherine loved each other. Simply, completely, without doubt or reservation. It was the kind of love that lasted, the kind that endured. The sun had set behind the Bitterroot Mountains by the time Elias finished his story. Samuel sat on the porch completely still, absorbing everything his grandfather had told him. Catherine emerged from the cabin, carrying a lantern. She set it on the table between them and settled into her chair, taking Elias's hand. "So that's how you met," Samuel said quietly. "That's how you knew what was worth fighting for." "Yes," Elias said. "And the lesson," and Elias leaned forward. "The lesson is this. Strength isn't about being hard all the time. It's about knowing when to be hard and when to be soft, when to fight and when to yield, when to protect and when to trust." But how do you know which is which? You listen to your heart, you think about the people you care about, and you ask yourself, what does love require of me right now? Sometimes it requires you to be gentle. Sometimes it requires you to be fierce. But it always requires you to be present and willing. Catherine squeezed his hand, and it requires you to take risks, to open yourself up to hurt, because the alternative is being alone, and that's not living. That's just surviving. Samuel nodded slowly. "I'm scared about France, about failing, about not being good enough." "That's normal," Elias said. "I was scared when I went to confront Dalton's gang. Your grandmother was scared when she testified against O'Brien. Fear doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're paying attention." "So what do I do with the fear?" "You use it, let it make you careful, but don't let it make you small." Elias stood and pulled something from his pocket, a Bowie knife, old and worn, but still sharp. "This was mine. I used it to save your grandmother's life. Now I'm giving it to you." Samuel took the knife reverently. "I can't take this." "You can, and you will, because you're going into the world to help rebuild what war destroyed. That takes courage. And when you doubt yourself, when you're scared, you hold that knife and remember. Your grandfather survived. Your grandmother survived. You come from survivors, and you'll survive too." Catherine stood and hugged her grandson. "And remember, you're not alone. You carry us with you. Carry us with our stories, our strength, our love." Samuel held them both, these two old people who had lived a lifetime of hardship and joy, and emerged with their love intact. "Thank you," he whispered. The next morning, Samuel left for the train station. Elias and Catherine stood on the porch watching him ride away, just as they had watched so many people come and go over the years. "Think he'll be all right?" Catherine asked. "He'll be fine. He's got good blood." Catherine smiled and leaned against her husband. "We did good, didn't we, with the kids, with the life? We did better than good. We did exactly what we set out to do. We survived. We loved. We helped people. And we did it together. 50 years. 50 years. And I do every single day again." Catherine looked up at him. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because they led me here, to this porch, with you. That's worth everything." They stood there as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the valley below in gold and amber. Two people who had been broken by the world and had chosen to heal each other. Two people who had been alone and had chosen to be together. Two people who had learned that the hardest things in life were also the most worthwhile. "Elias, yes, I love you. I love you too." And in the silence that followed, with the mountains watching and the morning light spreading across the land, Elias Thorne and Catherine Brennan stood together, still holding hands after 50 years, still in love, still exactly where they belonged. Home.